Hey everybody, welcome back to Tim Travels. It's Terry, your host, coming to you from exit 234 on I-80 in Ohio, Hubbard, Ohio. I'm at the Loves here. Got a load that I'm going to deliver tomorrow morning in Philadelphia. I'm actually going to leave out of here probably around 11 p.m. That way I don't have to rush. And I got to be under the bridge, under a bridge downtown. Actually, under the Ben Franklin Bridge is where this delivery is. I'm sure some people have been there before. I got to be there at 8, so I want to kind of beat traffic. So I'm trying to shoot for getting there around 6. Anyway, so let's talk about some trucking stuff, but I'm going to answer a question that somebody asked, and this is a little bit of today's history. I talked about the 1845 organization of the Naval Academy at Fort Severn on the Severn River, which empties into Chesapeake Bay in Annapolis, Maryland. And somebody asked me a question, why are they called midshipmen, and I think he was referring to Air Force cadets. Are these kids cocky or think their poop doesn't stink or something? And the answer to why are they called midshipmen, because back in the days of yore, when men were made of steel and ships were made of wood, although I did serve on a ship made of wood, to be accurate, Alaskan cedar covered in fiberglass. That's a story for another day. So on sailing ships, right, the officers lived in quarters on the stern or on the back of the ship. So you ever seen like picture of an old ship and it's got all these kind of like windows and it's kind of built up in the back? That's where the officers lived, and actually that's where the ship was conned from. So there would be a helmsman, right, turning the big wheel, and the rudders in the back, so it went almost straight down. And so that's where the officers, that was kind of where the bridge was. Well, then the enlisted guys lived close to their equipment in a lot of cases. Like the guys that were gunners oftentimes slept right in above the cannons. You see cannons sticking out the side of the ship, but the enlisted guys lived on the forward part of the ship. And so when midshipmen, who sometimes were as young as like 8 years old when they started going to sea, they lived in the middle of the ship. So they were the midshipmen, right? The middle of the ship, meaning they weren't enlisted, but they weren't officers. And, their job was to learn what officers did, prepare them, learn everything about the ship, prepare themselves for a life at sea. So that's where the title comes from. And as to how the midshipmen act, first of all, I've been retired over 20 years. In fact, I was talking to my wife today about the class of 98 because their 25th like anniversary of graduation is coming up this year. And so, all of the midshipmen that were in my company are all like grown-ass adults now. They have kids. A lot of them are already retired from the military. Like the gals that were in class of 98, a lot of them are already retired, if they stuck around for 20 years. Of course, some of them, lost their lives over the years, and some of them just stayed the requisite 5 years or 8 years, whatever it was, and they went off to do other things. So anyway, my experience with midshipmen, I was actually saying this to somebody the other day, was that they were both much better, much more accomplished, and smart and motivated and just a lot of good characteristics than I thought they would be. But at the same time, there were a few that were total pieces of crap. Okay. And, you know, I would, whether it was academically or performance-wise or something like that, you know, I would always go to these boards that would be considering, you know, what to do with somebody. You know, and I would, because I was the lowest ranking guy, I was the company chief, I got the first say. So when the admiral wanted to know what the chain of command thought, the first thing out of his mouth would be like, Chief, what do you think about Midshipman Scruffy? And I'd give them, you know, I haven't changed much over the years, and I'd just give them an unvarnished, you know, unemotional, fact by fact recitation of my analysis of this person's ability to further serve and to serve in the fleet or in the, you know, out in the Marine Corps. And it was, I can't think of a time, and I'm not saying this because I'm like, you know, I was the be all end all, but I can't think of a time where I thought somebody should either be shown the door or be retained that didn't happen. Because even though I hadn't finished law school or practiced law at that point, I've always been able to advocate for things, you know, and really lay it out in front of, you know, a boss or a, you know, commanding officer or whatever. So, you know, like I said, a lot of awesome kids go there. And then, you know, then there's a few dirt bags. It's like any other organization. And I'd be lying if I said there weren't some dirt bags or some ne'er-do-wells that actually get to graduate and get commissioned. It just happens. But generally speaking, they're good kids, and they perform at a really high level. And unfortunately, the service academies are having trouble recruiting, just like the larger, you know, force is having trouble recruiting. We're at a really, you know, I almost feel like we're at a perilous time for our military, because China is ascendant, but China is gonna start getting weaker just because their population is starting to decline, which means their economic power will start to decline. And, you know, unlike, say, the war in Afghanistan or in Iraq, if there was a war over Taiwan, the U.S. Navy would play a huge role in it, more so than just, you know, having SEAL teams and corpsmen on shore and stuff like that and just moving people around. It would be like the Navy would be the tip of the spear, because of course Taiwan's an island, and it would be, you know, the war in the Pacific redone. So I'm just concerned about that. You know, we don't have enough high quality people going in the military. I don't know what the answer to that is. Well, actually I do. It's just I don't have enough time to talk about it here. I have some ideas. So let's talk about trucking for a minute. So I wanted to share a couple of funny stories, and then just one kind of scratch your head story that I've either witnessed or been involved in lately. So I was at a truck stop, actually in Ohio, but in it's like a Flying J or a pilot up in Belmont, down in Belmont, Alpha 70. This has been a few weeks ago. But there was this old piece of crap Volvo 640 that was pulled in frontwards into a full truck spot, and the front, you know, the steers were up on the curb. So then, you know, I was like, okay, whatever, another junky Volvo. And so this guy shows up, and this nice pickup truck comes and drops him off, and he starts just doing all sorts of like chores, you know, like putting a mud flap, doing this and that, and I wasn't really paying attention to him. But anyway, a while later, the pickup truck, like a nice dually, comes back, and it's got some crap in the back. Well, they back it up to the side of the Volvo, and on the catwalk they put a full-blown, like one of those tall ones, shop size air compressor on the back of that bitch. And then they get a decent sized generator. And I realized what they were doing was apparently the compressor on this Volvo crapped the bed. So in order to be able to move it, they strapped this big ass air compressor on there, hooked it up to the airlines in the back of the truck, probably just the service one. They didn't need both. And then powered the whole damn thing up with this generator. And I mean, dude strapped everything on, bolted it up, and away he drove with that air compressor and generator. So I mean, I would have just sold the truck for scrap or whatever, but props to them for just like going all MacGyver on it and moving that truck out of the parking lot. Okay, so the second story is just kind of like a weird trucking story. So I went to this Tyson in Goodlettsville, Tennessee, and place was packed. There's freaking trailers everywhere. So and I was supposed to have a live unload. I was totally prepared for that. The guy comes in, he's like, all right, you're gonna drop this trailer. I said, oh, okay. I go, well, where do you want me to drop it? He's like, oh, just drop it, find a place over in that row, and then there should be some empties out in the back. I'm like, okay. So in front of me was a trailer from Johnson Feed Incorporated, JFI, and they're out of South Dakota. But and you know, I think they primarily haul meat. But anyway, so this JFI truck was in front of me. So he had already left, and I was talking to the dude, and the guy stamps my bills, and you know, they check the seal. So I go up, I pull in the gate, check my tail, and then I crank it around to the left, and there's a prime truck kind of about a dozen truck or trailers down backing in, and then there's this other truck, and mind you, it's dark, it's like 4 in the morning or whatever, 5 in the morning. There's this other truck that's parked perpendicular to the row of trailers, and he's just sitting there with his parking lights on, and I can't really tell who it is. So then as I'm coming up out of the corner of my eye, I see an open spot, and so I have room to swing around to the right so I can do a left side back into this pretty tight spot, drop my trailer. So again, I don't know why this guy is sitting there perpendicular and facing me, by the way. He's not facing the direction I am. He's like the head of his truck is towards me. So I'm like, no indicia that he wants to park, right? So I swing, and of course I roll my window down because I'm gonna back. So I got my 4-ways on. I swing around to the right and kind of angle off to the left to get my trailer where I want it, to back it in there. And this guy in this truck, which I now realize is this JFI truck, he yells out the window, "So you're just gonna take my spot, huh?" And I was like, how would I know that you were gonna park in that spot? Because first of all, you must have gone up and turned around, because you must really love blindsiding in a dark parking lot that's really busy. And I don't say all that, but I'm thinking, I'm like, how am I supposed to know that you were gonna park there? And at first I was kind of like, maybe I'll relinquish the spot, because at this point I'm lined up to back in it, right? I can back in this spot in 10 seconds. So then he says, inexplicably, but I don't know, maybe he's just a quitter. He says, "Whatever, go ahead and take it." I'm like, okay, thanks, and I just backed in there. I have no idea why this guy would have, and maybe a jockey had just emptied it, I don't know. But even if that, like you see a spot behind you, wouldn't you just, you see a jockey hooking up, you're like, I'm going to surmise, I'm going to draw an inference here that this guy is going to hook that trailer and pull it out of there. So I'm just going to wait right here and then immediately back in, because I'm already kind of set up, right? The back of my trailer's past the spot. I can look out my left window and back in there. Like if he had been facing the other direction and maybe canted off a little bit to the right, I would have been like, oh, he's going to back in that spot. I'll go around. But anyway, it was just weird. And there's this thing on Reddit. It's called AITA, Am I the Asshole? And I in this case, I don't think I was the asshole. I was just like, I'm not a mind reader. And then when he was like kind of being all sarcastic, just go ahead, I was like, okay, dude, I'm going to take you at your word. So anyway, that was that. Now the last story I just saw when I was in, while I was waiting for this load that I got on my back, my fleet manager asked me to go pre-trip a trailer from a company that Prime just bought out. And so he tells me where the trailer is. So I go over there, and it's at the big Smithfield plant in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. So as I'm going in there, there's a guy coming out, and if you ever been there, there's 3 lanes, right? There's the lane to the right where you go in, and then the middle lane is a scale where you come out if you're loaded, and then there's like an auxiliary lane where cars go through or jockeys run around. So this dude pulls up on the scale, right? And it says what his weight is. It's like, I don't know, it's like 74,283 pounds, right? The dude gets out of his truck. Now, mind you, this it's a scale, right? It's not super wide. And by this time, my truck's right beside his, except going the opposite direction. So he gets out as I'm pulling up and I stop, and he walks in front of my truck so he can see the scale, and he steps backwards towards his trailer, but like he's like right up against the trailer, like sucking his, like trying to get skinny so he can get his feet, and this guy wasn't fat or anything, I'm just saying he was like plastered against the trailer so he could get his feet on the scale to make sure he was adding his weight to what the scale said, to write down what the scale said. And I'm like, dude, you're at like 74,000 pounds. I mean, yes, that 80,000 pounds or 80,400 if you got an APU, that includes the weight of the driver, right? The driver weighs 400 pounds, it's included. If he weighs 200 pounds, it's included. But I was like, dude, you're at 74,000 and change. I don't think you're, just add some numbers. Like, don't you know about how much you weigh? Who cares, right? But it was just so funny to me that he was so concerned about the exact weight. And I'm like, dude, it's just a big ass industrial scale, But anyway, somebody told him to do that. He wasn't a young guy either, but it didn't look, it wasn't like he was his first week. Well, it might have been his first week, but anyway, I just thought that was kind of comical. I'd never seen that before. I have said to people in the past that were on a scale that had their window down, I'm like, hey, you need some extra weight? I'll step on behind your trailer. That's just my little joke. It's my little trucker humor. So I want to talk about a couple of things in the trucking industry that are of interest. So there are several governmental things going on. And the first one is maybe the simplest issue. Well, actually more than one, right? So we already know that FMCSA wants to extend ELD to more trucks, all trucks. We also know that they want to, they have a proposal to govern the max speed on all trucks. Interestingly, apparently when FMCSA zigs, the legislature in Indiana zags, because the legislature there, a few of them were like, we should raise the trucking speed to match the car speed. Now, I'll say this, I don't think, I do have a problem with speed differentials. And sometimes they're extreme, like on I-68, going east down into Cumberland, Maryland. The Maryland Department of Transportation inexplicably kept the car speed limit at 70 and lowered the truck speed to like 45. So now if you're obeying the speed limit going down that grade, you got people zooming past you at like 30 to 40 mile an hour speed differential. It's just a matter of time before some car, loaded with people plows into the back of a really slow moving truck. So I'm not a big fan of speed differential. But anyway, so we know about what the FMCSA is doing. So there's another governmental edict that's coming out about your NOx, right? Your nitrous oxide. And they want to lower this again. And, the problem is, I guess, that California, CARB, right, the California Air Resources Board, already has a stricter standard in place. And a lot of the people, of course, some people are like, no, we shouldn't do any pollution controls on big semis. But other organizations are just like, hey, look, before you implement this, can we just get a standard across the board in every state? And once again, right, we have interstate commerce being held hostage by states that won't talk to each other. I think the federal government really just needs to intervene in a big way and figure out what the standard is, and then invoke the supremacy clause on this. And if you don't know what the supremacy clause is in the Constitution, it basically says that the federal government, if they have a lot of interest and activity, if you will, and I'm kind of messing up that language, but basically, if the federal government has a big interest in an issue, then federal law trumps state law. It's supreme to state law. So in some cases, like the federal government has put down some guidelines and then lets states kind of manage it according to how they want to do it. But I think in the interest of commerce, we need to have federal standards that are the same for everybody, whatever they are. Everybody, like I've said, a lot of these truckers think, oh, well, I should be able to drive as fast as I want. I shouldn't have to keep electronic logs, blah, 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 right? But that's a competitive disadvantage. And to me, right? Now, you say, well, how is that? You could just go faster. But the truth of the matter is that, my company says, well, this is how fast we want to go. And it kind of like meets the standard. But, the other day I was somewhere, I was in South Dakota where the speed limit is 80 miles an hour. And, I had trucks going by me like 87 miles an hour. Why? Because I can see what they're going, 86, 87. There's no truck in America that should be going that fast. Sorry. I don't care what the reason is. I wouldn't drive a fire engine that fast. It's just not that safe. And, so I just want the standards to be, whatever the standards are, they need to be the same for everybody, right? So the big picture item that I wanted to talk about is that the Secretary of Transportation, in part because, well, a lot of this is because of climate change, right? So they've identified, basically broke out, okay, here is the by category where we have the most pollutants, right? The most nitrous oxide, most greenhouse gases per, ton mile, let's say. So the least polluting of means of transportation is ship, right? In other words, a ship can move a ton of cargo a mile with the least amount of pollution, and it's tiny compared to other. The next least polluting is rail. Then after that, the next least polluting is like cargo vans, like sprinters, and then over-the-road trucks, then local trucks, then airplanes. Okay? And, let's forget a second about the airplanes, because that's just super expensive. And let's forget about the little cargo vans, because that just doesn't move a lot of cargo at any one time. So, obviously, I can't take my ship from Lexington, Kentucky to Omaha. I could take a canoe maybe, and it'd be a circuitous route, but I can't take like an 800-foot long container ship. So we already know what the container ships are going to be used for. So the administration, and I get why they want to do this, right? It's a laudable goal to try to save the planet. And honestly, that's what we're talking about. We are talking about preventing, death and destruction, literally death and destruction, by trying to at least slow down climate change, right? It's evident, right? Just look at the weather. Look how many people have been killed in this country by crazy weather. In this country, by crazy weather this year. Forget about the Philippines, Pakistan, all these other places around the world. Just in your backyard, right? So, so the idea is we're going to shift. This is what the government's saying. We're going to shift. The way we're going to accomplish these goals is we're going to shift so much off the roads, the OTR market, onto rail. The problem with that is this. In case they weren't paying attention about a month and a half ago, or 2 months ago, or a year ago, or 5 years ago, American railroads are service failure monsters, okay? As truck drivers, we talk about service failures, but when we service fail, it's on a micro level, right? It's one load, one driver, one delivery, right? Railroad service fails so bad that the government routinely gets involved. The Surface Transportation Board routinely gets involved in train service failures. In fact, the Surface Transportation Board just issued an order, I think, to Union Pacific to deliver cargo, which I think was either grain or chicken feed, to California, because there were like a gazillion chickens in danger of dying. And by the way, egg prices are already high because of avian flu. A lot of chickens have had to be euthanized. So the government routinely calls, government never will call a trucking company on the carpet, but they call railroads on the carpet all the time, because railroads move so much, right, compared to trucks. But here's the problem with what, the Secretary of Transportation is talking about and everything. The railroads already aren't that great at doing what they do. That's why some trucks are on the road, not because the load needs to move in a truck, but because the railroads are so unreliable and stuff takes so long to move. Now, some trains, if you're familiar with the railroads, are high priority. Like BNSF has these things called Z trains, right? The Z trains are intermodals, often trailer on flat car, right? And you'll see, all the companies, right? UPS, Schneider, Prime, everybody uses Z trains. But those are super high priority, and those are the ones that you see barreling through, crossings at like 70 miles an hour, right? I was out in Kansas, and there was a Union Pacific train that was intermodal, and we kind of caught up to it for some reason, but then we were going 65 and he just started pulling away from us because track speed must have been 70. But you can't run an entire railroad of high speed Z trains, right? Because if everything's a priority, then nothing's a priority, right? So I really wish that the government would say, okay, we need to invest, and I'm a Union Pacific stockholder, but I can tell you right now that I think that if we want world economic dominance in the United States, we probably need to make the railroads, take away the profit motive and really run the railroads like we kind of run power plants, and with a lot of government oversight and government investment, right? Because everybody benefits from rail. Everybody benefits from trucking, right? The entire economy, whether people don't believe it or not, everybody benefits from those systems. So if we want to, cut down on greenhouse gases, and we think taking trucks off the road is the way to do it, then what we got to do is we got to invest in infrastructure and take away the profit motive, right? Because Union Pacific's paying me a dividend every quarter on all the stock that I own. But, they don't have enough people, and they don't put enough money into infrastructure. Even though they put billions a year into infrastructure, it's not enough to get us over this hump, right? The system that's there is essentially the system that was there when we had 50 million less people in the United States. It's not really changed. There's a lot of abandoned trackage in America. Some's been turned into rail trails. That's cool, but we got to up our game, right? And, there's too much opposition to doing that. There's even opposition, like there's a merger going on between Canadian Pacific Rail and Kansas City Southern that will take some of the pressure off the hub in Chicago, because Chicago's a huge choke point. There's some others, but Chicago's the biggest one because every railroad in North America goes in there, right? Every major railroad, all the class ones. But there are people in towns where Kansas City Southern or CP has trackage that are opposed to this merger that will create economies of scale, because they don't want more trains going through their town, even though their town's there because the railroad came first. I mean, that's just the nature of America. And so I think as truckers, right, we got to be aware of what's best for us, but also what's best for the country, right? If we, all these guys flying the American flag, they think they're patriots. Well, you need to do what's best for the country. And I think there should be an enormous public investment in railroads, more public investment in passenger rail that'll take cars. I mean, how many times have you been driving out in the middle of nowhere and there's like 8,000 frickin' cars going in your direction? Why is that? It's not because there's that many people living in Wyoming. It's because people are trying to go from A to B. But if we had effective rail corridors, a lot of people might say, ditch the car, ride the train. They don't want to fly, but they would ride a train. So anyway, just kind of my thoughts on the trucking world, the transportation world. It's all interconnected. Whatever happens to, it's like an equation, right? What you do to one side, you got to do to the other, right? It's a zero-sum game. So anyway, thanks for tuning in, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye.